All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Technology and Intent, brought to you by ArabNet and PITME. We've got a special guest today, Prashant, part of the TiE Angel Group, one of the, I think, biggest angel groups on the planet, right?
Well, it depends how you define it, but
okay.
it's definitely an active group.
Active group, yes, yeah. Definitely. And I've been involved or connected to some of your fellow investors through Founder Institute. Anyway, welcome to the show. Thanks for making the time. I want to welcome you to our little setup here. And tell us a little bit, just briefly, where have you been, what you've done, and what are your kind of activities now today?
Sure. So, most recently, as you put it at TiE Angels, I run the TiE Angels network here in Silicon Valley. And prior to that, I spent 10 years at a firm called Hummer Winblad Venture Partners. Mm-hmm. So I've been doing investing either through a formal fund or on my own now for about 12 years. Before that, I was at a startup which got acquired, had a successful exit, so that was very nice. And then before that, I spent a number of years in large companies like AT&T and Cypress Semiconductor. Huh. So for the geeks out there in the audience, I'd like to say that my resume actually spans all 7 layers of the stack. So everything
7 layers.
Networking,
I was going to say, you have done
applications,
very cool. But are you technical? Are you a product guy? What's your where's your sweet spot as far as what you really truly deep down love?
So I am a technical product guy. So
okay.
Engineer by training with an MBA. But absolutely, most of my career has been in product management, and so that it turns out to be a very good basis for being an investor.
Yeah.
Because what that means is you have to understand technology, not necessarily at the in-depth level of a hardcore coder or somebody like that. Although that helps too. But you have to understand it enough and its applicability into market spaces. And so that's what product management is all about. Mm-hmm. And ultimately that rolls up into investing, because then you want to understand technology, how it fits into markets, which ones are growth markets, and combine all of that into a pattern matching skill that you develop as an investor.
Awesome. Were you at Hummer Winblad when they did the KIP investment?
That was just after me.
After you, okay. Yeah. So part of the reason I talk about that is because I met Brian early on, and one day he shows up, he's like, I need $5 million. And I took him to Adeo, and he did his little magical thing, and Adeo was like, okay, you're crazy enough to do this. And then a couple weeks later, he announced the round with you guys, Hummer Winblad, being involved. Which brings up a good point. I saw Anne on a panel once, and she talked about having had 100 and something meetings to raise her first fund, I think 25 years ago.
That's right.
So that means 25 years ago there really wasn't a startup ecosystem as we have today.
That's right.
Tell me a little bit as far as what changed during the 10 years of being at Hummer Winblad. The ecosystem was right after the boom and then the bust. So tell us a little bit about that experience, and then maybe tie it on to how it's fundamentally different being part of an angel group.
Sure. So I think the first part has been documented pretty well in a lot of blogs. And that trend that you're asking about is this notion that it is really, really cheap now to start a software company. Mm-hmm. And I speak specifically software because that's primarily my background, etc. But even when I started at Hummer Winblad 10 years ago, and certainly when Ann and John started their first fund, the amount of capital that was needed to do a software company was several $1 million. So your A round was typically $4 or $5 million.
Yep.
And that was just kind of the cost of entry in order to write the software, get the development tools, hire the engineers and all of these things, and then deploy it on a server inside behind somebody's firewall. And it was quite a heavy-duty task just to get started. Fast forward 10 years, and now, today, we're at this point where the cost of starting a software company, whether it's a software application that sits on your mobile phone or even something that sits on a server, is effectively zero.
Yeah, basically, right? That's a good way of putting it.
If you're a coder, you can sit down.
Right.
In fact, just before this meeting, I sat down with a guy who's leaving his company. He's a fantastic CTO, and he's been on the enterprise side for a long time. And I said, "What are you doing now?" And he described his application, and he's saying he's putting it together in his living room. Right? I mean, this is not anything that requires a lot of money to get started. So that's been the big sea change for both investors and for entrepreneurs, is the cost of getting started in the software world is now diminished down to practically zero. So, but that has implications. And people will say to you, they'll say, well, that's great. That means, if you're an entrepreneur, it's a great time to be an entrepreneur, all those kinds of things, and they're true. And we see that on the investor side now as well, which is you don't need, your Series A doesn't have to be this big $4 or $5 million round. You can do seed investing, which is why we've seen the rise of angel investing in the past few years. and accelerators and incubators and all of these things, because for a little bit of money you can really help entrepreneurs get to the next level very effectively, cost effectively. But the downside of all of this is that while the cost of getting started has reduced, that means there's increased competition, and so the cost of actually differentiating and getting to market has increased.
Yeah.
And so the overall cost of actually getting your product out there is probably still $4 or $5 million at the end of the day. It's just that the initial step is very small, and then that second step is more expensive than it used to be. And so the entrepreneurs out there, what they have to do is, yes, they have to get the product out, they have to do all of that, but now they got to focus on how do we execute, and that sales execution and the ability to drive happy customers and all of these kinds of things, that the execution piece once the product is out there is really, really critical now, way more than it's ever been.
Interesting. And then fundamentally, how has it changed as far as looking at deals? Like when you look at deals now, so as the group, explain a little bit how the group does investing, what stage, and what size deals, and what the companies look like that you look at today.
Sure. So TiE Angels, so TiE itself, for viewers who aren't familiar, is a global nonprofit that supports entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. And so we have chapters around the world. We have 60 plus chapters around the world. We have Silicon Valley is where the organization started. This is still headquarters as far as all the chapters are concerned. And we put on programs, events. For example, the weekend of March 17th, that Friday, Saturday, we have our big TiECon that happens every year. It's our annual flagship event. We get 4,000 people from around the world that come to this thing. It's the largest entrepreneurs conference in the world.
Wow.
It's Worth Magazine put it right up there with conferences like TED and World Economic Forum and so on as one of the 10 best conferences to go to. So it's a fantastic, fantastic organization. But a couple of years ago, we realized that some of our senior members, who we call charter members, were doing angel investing anyway. So we said, why don't we put them together and create a forum so that we can invest together and look at companies together and have a little momentum rather than just doing it as individuals. And so that's how TiE Angels got started back in 2010. And because our backgrounds are primarily enterprise, that's what we tend to invest in as well.
It's funny because most people don't invest in enterprise or B2B.
Right.
It seems like in the Valley, B2C is kind of what people like, because I think it's the sales cycles are either launching the product is easier and cheaper. So that's actually good. So you're filling a void of investments. And then typically, what stage or what size deals are you looking at, or is it agnostic?
Well, they tend to be first round investments. In fact, I would say not tend to, they are first round investments. And usually our group puts in somewhere around $400,000 into a given round. And we've done 17 investments in 2.5 years, and they've ranged everything from where we did the entire round ourselves, anywhere from $500,000 to $1.5 million or something like that, and we did the whole thing ourselves, all the way to there's already term sheet on the table with an institutional VC, and we sign up with that participation along with the VC.
Very cool.
So it runs the whole gamut.
Has your day-to-day life changed as far as being at a fund versus being part of this group?
Oh yeah. No, my wife now pays a lot closer attention to the checks that I write.
That's funny.
So we invested in that one. Yeah, that Hummer would let him know. We did. Okay.
That's funny. No, but I mean, like you're still looking at a bunch of deals.
Yeah. Now, from that perspective, I meet with entrepreneurs practically on a daily basis or talk to them. I work out of home, so that the good news is I don't need an office or anything. Kind of just meet at Starbucks like everybody else, and so that part of it is a lot of fun. The other big difference is that TiE Angels is not a fund. So when we put money into these companies, we write checks as individuals.
Yeah.
And that has an implication, because that means, as the head of TiE Angels, I manage a process, but it's not a fund. So we have to really manage it in a way where we encourage participation and to convince people to participate and so on, because we're convinced that it's a good investment to make and so on.
But it's still, is it that you or one of the members meets an entrepreneur and makes a connection and then passes it on, or is there actually like demo days, similar like to Keiretsu or some of the other groups where you come present and whoever wants to participate fills out the paper?
Yeah, it's a lot closer to the latter. So we run on a monthly dinner cycle, and what we ask is for entrepreneurs who are interested for a given month, we ask them to get their applications in on that first Monday of that month. So like, for example, March, whatever this first Monday, I think it's March 2nd or 3rd or something like that. That's the deadline for March. And then we've got a screening committee that helps vet all the plans that come in. They do it both online and in person. And then by the time the third Monday rolls around, our third Monday is when we have our dinner meeting with the full investor group. We have about 150 investors. And so we pick 3 companies through that vetting process to showcase at the dinner. And the 3 companies get to stand up and do short 10-minute presentations followed by Q&A. And just as you said, the investors in the dinner who are interested in those companies, we have literally sign-up sheets. We form teams of people interested in the company and start the due diligence cycle from there.
And then the deals happen relatively quickly once the diligence has happened?
Yeah, our goal is to get the deals done. Well, our goal is to get a decision made in 30 days from the dinner.
That's cool.
And so sometimes we hit that, sometimes we don't. Life throws a lot of variables at you.
Yes, of course. And then are any of the deals international or is it mostly local?
No, it turns out that despite the international nature of TiE, most of the deals are local. And I think it's simply a function of the fact that when you're investing in that early stage,
you have to be around on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that seems to be an issue. So I've tried to help a bunch of companies in the Middle East, and Google doesn't invest at all, and most investors don't want to invest in companies outside the region. A, they want to be connected. B, they want to have influence and really mentor and have the money be smart money, as we call it here. But there are a few people I've talked to now who are looking at deals in Jordan. Dave McClure is doing deals there in Israel, in Turkey. And then, the idea for us is really to kind of open the communication. A lot of the funds and incubators in the Middle East, are looking for syndication partners. And a lot of the companies could potentially end up here or should end up here, even just as part of a learning process. So we'd love to, figure out a way to tie together.
Yeah. No, we'd love to. Absolutely, we'd love to.
Okay, so really quickly, we have this kind of segment part of the segment called Lessons Through Stories.
Okay.
And the idea is that we have this board of kind of funny topics of things that you've experienced personally, and ideally these stories are supposed to be stories that you haven't told in public before. But the idea is really to add a human element to an experience that has helped you or in business or yourself, and just was an experience. So which one, I know you were looking at a couple of them, which one?
Yeah, well, I can tell you something that happened to me recently, and so I know I haven't told it in public.
Okay, awesome.
And that would be with the one on the bottom corner there, that decimal is in the wrong place.
Okay, very cool.
That.
We haven't had that one before.
Good. So, the story behind this is every now and then you'll get a first-time entrepreneur who sends you a business plan, and they've got a reasonable idea. But what they're not well-versed in is how to present that idea and really understand how to take that idea from concept to business.
Yeah.
And that shows up a lot in the way that they write their executive summary and explain to you how they're going to make money and what the revenue model is and these kinds of things. So just a couple days ago, an entrepreneur had sent me an email saying, hey, can you take a look at my executive summary? I said, happy to do that. Took a look at it. Plan was fine. The idea was there. And I said, well, what are your projections? And so he didn't send me a spreadsheet or anything like that, but he said, well, in my first year, in year one of revenue, I'm going to do $768 million.
That decimal was off by a few spots. Oh my
Exactly.
God.
So when I say that decimal point is off by, it's way off.
Way off.
Way off.
1, 2, 3. I mean,
Exactly.
whatever it is. Okay.
Exactly. And of course, now, this is a serious endeavor on his part, right? It's not like he's just making. He's making stuff up. He's projecting. But what I mean is, he believes it. And I said, well, you do realize that if you hit $768 million of revenue in the first year, this would be the most phenomenal growth rate in the history of startups.
Anything.
Ever. and his response was, yeah, I know that. Very serious. Well, so help me understand. How did you come to this number? And he said, well, I've got a channel partner, and they told me that 60% of the customers that they survey said they would buy our product. And you know, I don't want to go into the space of what the
Sure,
company is,
sure.
but they've got 2.5 million customers, the channel does. And so he did the math of 2.5 million, or rather 2.5 million units of their product gets sold or whatever at 60%. He did the math and he said, well, so that comes up to $768 million in the first year. And the, you know, for entrepreneurs or first-time entrepreneurs and thinking through this, bear in mind that is, you're confusing what your potential market is there with what you think your revenue is going to be. And the way you want to do this, it's not from the top down to say, hey, I'm going to get 1% of a $5 billion market by blah, blah, blah. And even if I'm off from 1%, let's say I'm off to a 0.5%, it's still going to be, that's the wrong way to do it.
Yeah, of course.
That gives you a sense of how big the market opportunity might be, but that doesn't actually explain how you drive sales.
Yeah.
So you really need to take it from the bottoms up. Think about how many salespeople you're going to have, how many, you know, what your close rate's going to be, what do you think the product is going to sell for. You have to do it from that angle. And then, yes, you use the top-down numbers to kind of figure out, do you actually ever get there or not?
Does an answer like that, I don't want to say scare you, but does it make you wonder, like, how mature or how, you know, the entrepreneur is? Because, I mean, again, not knowing what the product is, he'd be lucky to get 1% of that. And it's not because it's 1% of the total market, but to scale a business to $700 million, even if it's, you know, subscription on, it is a big operation. And even to 700,000 in the first year, that's an accomplishment, because as we see here, a lot of businesses in their first year are not cash flow positive or revenue so positive revenue. But, you know, does that scare you when someone says something like that? Absolutely.
And it's not so much that it scares me. And I told the entrepreneur this. I said, you're going to lose credibility.
That's what
like that. Right? People are going to look at that number and say, you know, it's just not, incredible really is the right word. People just won't believe that you know what you're doing if you come in and say, I can do 700 million and I can prove it because of this reason and that reason.
Now, if he had said 700,000, would that have changed your perspective on the deal? Or, I mean, would that have kind of added on top of, okay, you've got a good product and there's something here, and, you know, 700,000 is still a decent number, maybe 5 million in 3 years, whatever the number is. But fundamentally, in that moment, does this little switch, does it turn you off?
It turns off. It's the, you know, when someone makes a projection
the fluff
that way out there, well, it's not even fluff. It's this, you know,
illusions of grandeur. That's what
illusions of grandeur, certainly, to say the least. But it becomes a very binary moment. Right? All of a sudden, it's like it goes from interesting idea, 700. You know, if he had, like to your point, if he had said 700,000, then, you know, you might question, like, well, how do you get there? You know, how does that figure? What does go to the next year? What are the levers in your business plan that's making all of this stuff? What are the drivers? And you can have that conversation. But as soon as somebody says it's a $700 million first year, you just think there's, you know, I'm just completely off at this point.
Yeah.
It is just so way out there.
And it could literally kill a potential deal.
Oh, completely. You just lose interest.
Lose interest. I mean, look, everybody always talks about go big or go home, or think big or dream big, and that's great. But I definitely, I've seen about 2,000 pitches, and every time I hear one of these numbers, even remotely close to something like that, I'm like, good Lord. First of all, it's a projection, so it is fluff in a sense.
Right.
Second of all, you definitely want to under-promise and over-deliver, and sophisticated investors will probably have a better idea than you do anyway, because they've seen something similar. You know, they understand the market. So, you know, that's an important point, because I see a lot of people in the Middle East also who get excited and want to, you know, talk about the market or their opportunity, and then they do these kinds of things, and it literally hurts them. So,
well, the idea, to your point, was that it is projections, and so there's no investor in his right mind who will ever look at a 3-year, 5-year pro forma and assume that that's carved in stone, that's the gospel, or any of that kind of stuff, right? I mean, we get it. But what those numbers do reflect is your way of thinking and your strategy, and that's the important part. And so if somebody says I can do 700 million, clearly they don't have a strategy. What they're just saying is this product is going to sell itself, that everyone's going to want this.
Yeah, it's a little bit delusional, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, so finally, we have this thing that we do. It's called Old Rules. So instead of it being new rules, we want to talk about, you know, what's one of your rules that you live by, not just for yourself, so that's one, but also what do you like people to abide by? And so I always explain it in my sense: be on time and be on time. I'm German, half German, so
that explains.
So yeah, I take pride in being on time, and I really like it when people are on time. And so in the Middle East, that doesn't happen. And literally, I've left when people haven't shown up, and then they're offended. But for me, it's respecting your own time and someone else's time is very important. But what are some of the rules that you live by and that you want to kind of have other people live by as well?
So the big rule for me on the investing side is having an in-depth understanding of what your market, or rather the problem you're trying to solve in the market you're going after. And I ask basically two questions to entrepreneurs that I meet. The first one is, why, for your product, why is anyone in that market going to make a purchasing decision? The second question is, why will they pick you if they do make a purchasing decision?
Mm-hmm.
And the second question most entrepreneurs do a pretty good job at. They say, well, we've got better technology, we can do this, we've got that feature, this other guy doesn't, whatever. And they do a reasonable job of explaining the difference because
Mm-hmm.
it is a question of competition in
Yep.
the landscape, effectively. But the first one always trips people up because it sounds easy, and it's really not.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really the core idea of why you think your business is going to be successful.
Yeah.
Why somebody's making a purchasing decision is a very fundamental judgment that you have to make when you're out there selling something. And let me give you an example. Usually I'll ask that question, people will say, well, it delivers good ROI, or it solves a pain point. And the reality is most people have a pain point they've been living with for a long time.
Yeah.
And so just solving that pain point isn't in itself enough. The question is, how big is that pain?
Sure.
Is it something they really want to change? Here in the U.S. we hear these auto insurance commercials from Geico all the time.
Yeah.
Call Geico, it'll save you 15%.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? They probably would. If you call them, I bet you they'll save you 15% on your auto insurance.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that auto insurance isn't necessarily the biggest worry that you have. You've got a mortgage, which is bigger. If you've got kids in school and
Sure.
college funds and all this kind of stuff. So you've got much bigger problems to deal with. And so Geico has to spend a lot of money to convince you to
Like
call
$500
them.
or $700 million a year.
Is that what it
the
is?
marketing budget? It's some insane number. Yeah.
There you go.
But again, at that scale, I guess they figured out that it somehow works.
They do.
So
They've got the numbers,
yeah.
right? And they know that auto insurance,
Mhm.
you're rolling off. And
Sure.
so there's a science behind it.
Yeah, of course.
But what I'm saying is, from a startup perspective,
Mhm.
that doesn't work.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
You have to be able to convince someone that they should use, for, let's say it's enterprise software, that some IT infrastructure technology they'll come in and say it'll save you on storage. Well, that's great, but is storage the biggest problem that the customer's really dealing
Mhm.
with? And yes, you probably can save them on storage. How much? A lot of issues around it.
Yeah.
And so having a really in-depth understanding of customer pain, and not just what the pain is, but why they're going to solve that pain and not this other pain over here,
Mm-hmm.
that is a very, very critical notion that you have to convey to investors.
Very interesting. That's a good piece of advice. Prashant, I want to thank you for making time. I hope you enjoyed this. We have a little something if you are working out, or I don't know if it's the right size, but
Oh,
we
that's
have a
great.
PITME t-shirt.
Thank you.
And I
That's
hear they're
fantastic.
really comfortable, but I think it's the wrong size. We'll grab another one. But anyway, want to thank you for making the time. And again, as we're kind of getting this whole thing going, so I told you we are going to have 10 companies come here in the course of what's called the next year, based on having watched this curriculum and studied. So we'd love to, at one point, have one of them maybe present to
It'd
the
be a
group,
pleasure, absolutely.
if that's something that's interesting, even for the learning experience. So definitely want to thank you and look forward. Have hopefully a great conference coming up in a couple of weeks, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
Want to thank you guys for joining us again. Thanks to ArabNet, and also thanks to PayPal. Appreciate it. Peace.